Today on HopeFilled Financial Podcast, we got some hot controversies to talk about. 3 controversies to be exact, starting with how the viral dress from 2015 can teach us a very valuable lesson with our personal finances. The second controversy is about the 4% rule. I made some very colorful graphs here that are going to explain the risk zone and help us visualize risk. And lastly, George Kamel from Ramsey Solutions has said that my intentions are malicious. Not once, but twice publicly, once here in the comments, and again in an episode of the Iced Coffee Hour. We're going to jump into the clip from the Iced Coffee Hour and hear George directly address the 8% controversy from my call in November. Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled Financial Coach, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. For today's story, we're going to be talking about the dress that went completely viral and broke the internet in 2015. This dress, which I believe is actually a white and gold dress, regardless of what you're seeing now, went viral because, well, depending on your lighting, and I guess there was some dependence on your biology, you either saw the image here in the middle, which is the original, as white and gold, or black and blue. And it really was something that split people across the internet. I remember my first time seeing this image and being confused. Because the first time I saw it, someone told me they believed it was white and gold, and I saw black and blue. But later, as I was looking at it, trying to figure it out, I watched it change colors in front of me. And there were people on the internet who were completely divided over this and getting into heated arguments as to what color the dress actually was. One picture that came out that really helped resolve this issue was a picture of someone wearing the dress where there's sunlight hitting their torso. And a picture like this clearly shows that where the sunlight hits, clearly the dress is white and gold, but in the shadows it looks blue and black. And we're just talking about a dress, a picture of a dress. Why did people get so heated about this? Well, our experiences, what we were able to see of this dress, informed us of reality. And whether we saw it as white and gold or black and blue, we wanted to trust our most reliable resource, our senses, our lived experience, our anecdotal proof that the dress was one thing or another. And our eyes never deceive us, do they? We can get so wound up in what we believe from our lived experience and what it is that we believe to be true from what we see right in front of us, what we believe is plain and simple. I mean, what gets more simple than the color of a dress? We get so wound up over that we can get passionate. There's a story I remember when I was homeschooled. And I can't remember if this was a Sesame Street cartoon or a children's book or a fable from an old storybook that my mother had me read. And if you recognize this story, please share where I can find a source for it. I wanted to go through a video or read the book, but I can't find it anywhere. The story goes something like this. A wealthy lady in a medieval town. She might be a princess, she might be a queen, she might simply just be someone of high esteem, wears a dress that's split down the middle, 2 different colors. We're just going to say white and blue for the context of the 2015 dress. I don't remember the color in the actual story, but the dress is split right down the middle. She's got people in front of her, people in back of her. She's being carried by 4 gentlemen who have her in a chair. And people can't see her until they pass right by. She's marching down the middle of Main Street to the castle or the palace, whatever. And as people on one side see a blue dress, the people on the other side see a white dress. And as she passes by, everyone comes together in the middle of Main Street and they start talking about how beautiful she looked in her new dress. Some people said the dress was blue. Some people said the dress was white, and they started to fight. They were, just like the internet got in 2015, heated over the color of a dress. And they believed they were right. They believed that everyone on the other side of the street, everyone opposite of them, was just clearly wrong. And there wasn't really a healthy argument that could be made other than, this is what I saw. This is what I believe. How can you disagree with me? Well, in this story, the lady who wore the dress hears that the townspeople are fighting and walks down Main Street on her own and then turns and walks again so people can see that her dress was comprised of 2 colors. Again, if you have a source to an original story for a lady wearing a split dress, please share it with me in the comments. I want to find the original, be it the story of the split dress or the example from the viral dress in 2015. There are two lessons I want us to take away from this. One, we can't rely solely on our personal experience and our history when it comes to personal finance decisions, because our own experience may not be part of the whole story. It may not even represent the truth of what it is that we're so passionate about. We need to be open-minded into hearing both sides of a story and start looking for more evidence that can help us discover the truth of a matter, especially when our hope-filled financial future depends on that truth. For the white and gold dress, there are multiple videos on YouTube and articles that were written back, what was it now, 9 years ago, that explain the science behind how the dress can appear as something that it isn't, and how so many of us can firmly believe that it was not white and gold. Here's the second lesson I want us to take away. Just because we disagree with someone on a matter that seems obvious or plain doesn't mean that we need to get riled up about it. We don't need to get fired up. In fact, we need to approach a topic that can be contentious with an open mind and be willing to try to find arguments that are productive, not ones that are he said and they said and she said and moving on unverifiable evidence. We need to start taking a more grounded, measured approach and not become upset. This is a lesson I want to take to heart and make sure that I don't ever fall into a trap of becoming dogmatically rigid in anything I share with you on the podcast. If I do, please call me out in the comments, let me know, and I'll do my best to correct myself and hone in closer to a truth in future episodes. With that promise, let's move on to today's main topic. Today's main topic is inspired by this comment from Manuel Kamel 6219. First and foremost, thank you for leaving this comment, and for all of you who have left comments on YouTube or Rumble, I've really appreciated a lot of your feedback and ideas for episodes that can be entertaining and helpful here in 2024. And while the original comment's relatively long, I want to focus in on these two paragraphs. Comment reads, if you want to dig a little deeper into the math of retirement planning, you can read about what we call the retirement risk zone. You will easily find material on the subject on the internet, so I won't get into the details here. But the big picture, anything between a 3 to 6% fixed withdrawal rate is called the retirement risk zone. This is a place where your portfolio can either go spiraling down if you are not careful, if you end up withdrawing more than 6% fixed per year, or it can grow into an absurdly large amount if you end up withdrawing less than 3%. Usually, anything below 3% fixed withdrawal rate adjusted for inflation will assure income in perpetuity, whereas anything above 6% fixed withdrawal rate adjusted for inflation will assure depletion of assets sooner or later. Anything in between is the retirement risk zone. That's essentially what you have calculated in the Monte Carlo calculation inside this video. Now, this comment was made on the video where I covered my study on retirement safe withdrawal rate strategies and the risks that can be associated therewith given different retirement horizons, portfolio mixes, and withdrawal strategies. For the rest of the main topic, we're going to be diving into the risk zone a little bit more and how it can help you. When I Googled the risk zone, I found a lot of graphs that look like this. They kind of show, what I'm assuming in this graph is your nest egg value in the y-axis and time on the x. And as time goes on, you have the accumulation phase. Then 5 to 10 years before retirement begins, you have the start of the risk zone. The image we're looking at here shows it in a darker blue. Then 10 years into retirement, 5 to 10 years into retirement, the risk zone continues, and it's thereafter that the risk zone sort of dissipates. Now, the comment we had bracketed the risk zone between 3 to 6% withdrawal rates relative to the running nest egg value. We have an assumed idea, given the video the comment was on, that we're going to be using the constant dollar method, where we choose a percentage of our initial retirement nest egg. We make that our income for our first year in retirement, and then take that income and correct it for inflation moving forward, in hopes that as the market goes up and down, we can maintain consistent buying power through our income there, through our distributions, without putting the nest egg at risk of going under before our retirement ends. Before we dive into the example I made for graphically representing the risk zone, I want to ask, why does this matter to us? Why do we care? Well, if we're within the risk zone, if we, be it in time or with our relative withdrawal rate, we can recognize that we are either in a position where we're no longer exposed to some unknown risks when we're within the risk zone, or we can recognize that if we've left the risk zone in a direction that could leave our nest egg spiraling down to nothing, leaving us with more life at the end of the money, well, we can catch it. We can find the warning signs. We can make a course-correcting shift. If we're watching the way our nest egg is behaving, watching the markets relative to our income plan that we had, well, we can recognize when we've left the risk zone, either to a lower risk or a higher risk category. This can get a little bit messy, so if you have the video, I'm going to be showing a graph of 250 Monte Carlo simulations that I did to hopefully make this a little simpler. I know this graph just looks intimidating, but we're going to get through it. If you're listening to the audio only, I recommend that you at least check out the video after the fact so that you can see what this graph looked like. So let me explain what we got here. Over here on the y-axis, we have the percentage of our fixed dollar method withdrawal rate relative to our running nest egg. So if we had $1 million, let's say we follow the 4% rule, we pull out 40 grand the first year. Correct that for inflation moving forward. That's fixed, that's flat relative to inflation. However, the market goes up and down. And as the market goes up and down, the value of that 40 grand, corrected for inflation, is going to be a different percentage of our nest egg year after year, by quite a bit in some cases. Down here on the x-axis, I simply have time. Basically, every 5 years is marked. I've drawn a black rectangle for what I believe represents the risk zone by my interpretation of the particular graph. And then I've also colored each individual simulation. Now let's talk about the simulations. We've got a bunch of lines here on the graph. Each one represents what you could think of as the stock market doing something different in the future. Have you seen that clip from that popular Marvel movie where Doctor Strange is sitting there and he says,
"Went forward in time to view alternate futures, to see all the possible outcomes of the coming conflict."
Well, you can think of each one of these lines as a different multiverse of the stock market as to what it might do if we simulate the different decisions, if you will, that the market can make month after month and repeat it over and over and over. We can get an idea of the likelihood that the market will behave in a particular way. That gives us some statistical risks that we can understand. Now, I want to mention that these red lines, the red versions of the stock market, these are the ones that fail before 30 years for this example. All of the purple lines that are over here are ones that start trending like they're going to fail, but they don't actually run out of money before the end of a 30-year time horizon. They get close, but they don't actually fail. And then down here, we have a whole bunch of green lines that end up becoming a very small percentage or negligible percentage of the running nest egg value. These are the ones that not only succeeded, but the ones that are really, really, really low are the ones that have nest eggs that blew up in value. These are the portfolios with such little perceived risk by those whose lived experiences fall along the green lines that they may grow to believe that the 4% rule, if it's the one they implemented, was way too conservative. And this is what we need to recognize. We're going to have people in our lives who have an experience where they ended up falling on a red line, and they saw that the 4% rule wasn't conservative enough. And they're going to fall on that half of the extreme. They're going to fall on that half of the road that saw the lady with the blue side of the dress. Then they're going to be the people who have the experience down on the green part. They're going to see the 4% rule as being wildly over conservative. Their experience is going to be that they could have taken a whole bunch more out of retirement, that they were needlessly fear-mongered into taking out a little bit, and they could have enjoyed their lives so much more. Meanwhile, the reality is here that both options, both the red lines and the green lines, and also these purple lines, which are quite numerous in between, exist. They're all possibilities. Now, for this particular example that I ran, I utilized my 401k, my 401k portfolio, 70% mix into retirement. The other 30% is going to be in a bond index fund. And this particular graph utilized the 4% rule in order to run these simulations. Now let's talk about the risk zone over here. Given our goals in retirement, we might want to be on a purple line if our goal is to spend everything. Or if we want to leave a lot of money to our heirs, or we want to make sure that we're really, really not exposing ourselves to the potential of running out of money at all, we might want to be on a green line. Either way, inside the risk zone here, inside the weird box, there are red lines, there are green lines, and there are purple lines, and they're all mixed together. It's almost impossible to recognize in the space within the box whether or not you're on a red line, a purple line, or a green line. Let's talk about the boundaries of this risk zone. For this particular example, I found the bottom, just like in the comment that inspired this episode, that the bottom of the risk zone exists somewhere around 3%. Also, the top of the risk zone here lives around 6%. And lastly, and this is a little bit of an arbitrary gray area, I guess you could fade it out here, we see that it's about 10 years into retirement where the risk zone starts to dissipate and you're either more definitively on a red line, a green line, or purple. So how do we practically use this? If we end up in the first 10 years of retirement, for this particular example, it's going to be different for everyone's portfolio and everyone's time horizons. But if we end up above the bar in the risk zone, we know we're very, very likely going to be on a red line. We can see up here, if you're looking at the graph, that there are a lot more red lines coming out of the top of the risk zone than any other color. There are others. There's some green lines and some purple lines, but the bulk of them are red. So if we end up with a relative withdrawal rate that is above 6% of a rolling nest egg value, we have reason to try to make a correction to drop back into the risk zone until sometime after the 10-year mark. Down here, on the other hand, if we end up dropping below 3% for our relative withdrawal rate or distribution value, we can see that we're very, very, very likely going to be on a green line. Almost everything below is a green line. And then over here on the side, let's say in 10 years you don't pop off the top or go down the bottom. You come out the side. If you come out the side and you trend this way in time, somewhere between 6 and 3%, you can be much more confident that you're on a purple line. I personally find this example to be really helpful in a nice visual of risk. You can look at the concentration of red lines, purple lines, and green lines and recognize there's a lot more green lines following a constant withdrawal rate on the 4% rule. And the red lines are farther and few between, but they still exist. Now, to drive home this example, let's jump into a graph that represents the exact same situation, but this time, if our nest egg goes below its initial buying power, we're going to drop our 4% withdrawal rate down to 3% until the market recovers and our nest egg goes back above its initial inflation-corrected buying power. And that's going to be this graph, and if you can see the video, I can probably count the red lines on my two hands and not run out of fingers. I'm going to slide between them. This is the original. This is using the floor. The thing that blows my mind the most is making a risk zone that includes red lines, green lines, and purple lines becomes a lot bigger, and the bulk of what's in the risk zone is green. And the purple lines have dissipated significantly too. I'm going to slide back between them again. Look, there's a nice concentration of purple. It almost looks like my alma mater moving through the middle of the graph. Meanwhile, with the change to utilizing a 3% withdrawal rate when the market dips and the buying power is diminished in our nest egg, well, the purple lines are farther and fewer between. So if our main goal is to reduce risk in retirement, the risk of running out of money early, before the end, well, this looks like a very viable strategy that visually just seems a lot more relaxing. Now, I wasn't originally going to cover this again because the 8% safe withdrawal rate that Dave Ramsey gives is abysmal, very risky. But I figured you'd be curious too. What does an 8% withdrawal rate graph look like? This is the same example done again, but this time we're using Dave Ramsey's 8% safe withdrawal rate instead of the 4%. You'll see that the risk zone is significantly raised as the purple and green lines now live between 6 and 10%. The risk zone also now lasts a whopping 20 years. Oh, and the bulk of the graph is red. Most of them explode and go bye-bye. The purple lines are still far and few between compared to the original 4% rule, but where I'm sitting right here in the green lines, there's not a lot going on. The green lines are as sparse as the red lines in the original 4%, basically flipping risk on its head, if it's not even thinner. What I'm seeing here is emotionally unsettling. And that brings us to the bonus portion of this episode. Given how red that last graph was, I think you can understand why I really was shocked and motivated with Dave Ramsey's 8% withdrawal advice. I wanted to help change his mind for the good of his listeners and the good of his legacy because it is so aggressively and obviously risky to me. I had to say something for the good of all listeners. But in the comments of George's original video, a listener commented that George was clearly talking about financial independence, retire early, and that I misrepresented the video when I called Dave Ramsey. And George said he did not misrepresent it. He was intentionally malicious, which is even worse. And I was going to let that go unsaid. I responded. If you go to that comment, you can see that I asked George for his forgiveness and said that I wanted to move forward, putting the notion of maliciousness behind us. I didn't want to continue going back and forth in a way that would be detrimental to our respective reputations. And I wouldn't even be talking about that one particular comment if it weren't for this interview with George Kamel that was done by Graham, Stefan, and Jack. Graham and Jack have a podcast called The Iced Coffee Hour. This is one of the most popular financial podcasts right now that you can find anywhere. And I heard that George responded to the 8% stuff more directly than anything that we've seen up to this point. I was excited. This is what George had to say in his answers.
No, Dave was under fire recently for 8% withdrawal rate. What do you think about that? Do you think 8% withdrawal rate is fine? Do you think that could be a good benchmark for people when they're trying to retire?
I think there's certain situations where that would be totally fine.
George is right in saying that there are some situations where the 8% withdrawal rate would not be detrimental, where it could work out. One example would be someone who's retiring so late in life that their time horizon is short enough that 8% doesn't put them at risk for burning through their nest egg.
You follow the Ramsey plan and you have a giant nest egg and that's your plan, then that's sustainable. If you look at real numbers, hypothetically, like this is all, it's like your $1 billion question. Would you get $1 billion and do this? The realistic numbers are if you had $2 million in retirement and you were withdrawing 8%, you would be okay with a paid for house, money in the bank, and you would adjust. And Dave said on the show with Rachel.
Before we hear what Dave said on the show with Rachel, I'm disappointed that George says if you look at it realistically, because I feel like we have.
Rachel was like, well, hey, what if the return that year was 10% instead of 12? You go, well, you could take it down to 6%. But the key here is being flexible with your spending in retirement.
Okay, that's not what Dave said on the show. What Dave said on the show in response to Rachel was, say we wanted to be more conservative and we think our investments are going to make less on the whole. Dave's like, well, then take 10 minus 4 equals 6. That's fine, but why are you going to underinvest? He didn't say that's what you do in a down year.
Go a 10% rate of return. Go a little bit more conservative with your rate of return. Go 10%. What would you do with 10%?
Well, then 4 off of that, so 6.
6, yeah.
But why are you going to underinvest?
What I think George is doing right here is he's walking the line between disagreeing with Dave and trying to recognize potential information that contradicts Dave. It's very political.
So in retirement, if you're going, I need 12 grand to sustain this or else it's all going to fall apart, you've already failed. So the amount of people who are actually having to live this out is probably slim to none.
All right, I disagree. I don't think that the number of Dave's listeners who are going to need to intentionally implement a safe withdrawal rate strategy intentionally are slim to none. That's just not the case. What reality we need to recognize is the ones that are represented in the risk zone graphs that I shared with you. And the fact that people aren't on average saving enough for retirement in order to have flexibility. On top of that, there's also the fact that many of us have a goal of wanting to maintain consistent buying power in retirement. We don't want to move it up and down, and we would rather have a more conservative safe withdrawal rate in order to have consistency and predictability. This isn't something that we can just disregard flippantly.
And there's a lot of studies that show, because all of this is based on the Monte Carlo simulations.
Or the Trinity study.
Trinity study, Monte Carlo situation. And so a lot of them showed you could have negative money in retirement. You could have way more than you ever imagined in
But
retirement.
it's the failure rate. If Dave Ramsey's
It's the failure
8%
rate.
over
It's
30,
48% or 60% failure rate.
It was at
Depending
a
on who you
point.
looked at.
Yeah, it was over a 30-year time frame, but there was a high failure rate, and it's like, do you want to give that to a 50-50 coin flip of failing that? Assuming you keep your expenses at 8% adjusted for inflation every year beginning the first year. The other thing is that if you have a few bad years initially, it's almost 100%
Sequence of
failure
risk
rate.
return.
Or sequence of returns risk. The thing that blows my mind here is George is aware of the counter arguments. This is good news.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. And I think realistically, people adjust lifestyle depending on market conditions. And so that's why I think what Dave was saying was there's a lot of hope stealers out there who are like, if you don't have $2 million, you're screwed because you have to do 4%. If you don't do that, you're screwed. What Dave's saying is you're going to be okay. If you have no debt and $1 million, $2 million, $3 million in retirement, you're going to have a fine life and you can withdraw more than 4%.
But if we're counting on 8% being realistic and we go to a financial advisor, if we decide to use a financial professional for a retirement and they say, yeah, 8% withdrawal rates just don't exist in the reality that we have if we're going to utilize traditional rebalancing of your portfolio or invest in all equities as Dave recommends. And you end up feeling like you're going to have this great lifestyle and then are crushed by the fact that you don't. It's that to me is unfortunate.
Dave talked to you at all about this after the call? Because it seemed like he said, if George said something like that, we're going to take the video down.
Oh, yeah. Well, the producer talked to him. He was like, hey, the caller took that out of context maliciously.
I don't think I took George out of context. If you followed me since the November thing, you know that I, honest to goodness, care about you. I care about the people who listen to Dave, and I care about Dave Ramsey. I want people to recognize and realize the statistical undue risk they're exposed to if they believe, if they have a false hope in this 8% safe withdrawal rate stuff. In George's video, his original video, and I've shown it, I've talked about it before, had a citation from honestmath.com that talked about 30-year time horizons. 30-year time horizons are applicable whether or not we retire at age 30 to age 60, or from age 60 to age 90. 30 years is 30 years no matter how you shake it. Now that's what George's citation from honestmath.com explicitly said. I've been clear on that in my reaction videos before. What I don't think I've mentioned on this podcast before is Dave Ramsey's team, the producer, called me back twice after I hung up, because I hung up after Dave's rant ended. I didn't expect anyone wanted to talk to me. He called me back and asked, not about the name of the article that got taken down, but the name of George's video. And I had it in front of me. I gave him the title of the video. And the producer explained to me that George wasn't saying that we took out 3%. He was saying that that's what the FIRE community does. He was just talking about FIRE. He wasn't giving any recommendation around FIRE. To the contrary, and I explained this to the producer, I said, in George's video, he said that the FIRE movement typically totes 4% for their basis of decision making. And George's video was arguably making points against FIRE, reasons why the FIRE movement is not for you. And one of those is that 4% is too aggressive. He says to go 3%. And I said that 3% was for a 30-year time horizon, which is not exclusively applicable to FIRE. It is logically inconsistent for Ramsey Solutions to accept a study from honestmath.com that is, in my opinion, very conservative, say this applies to FIRE, and then go the total opposite direction when it comes to their stuff and say it's not applicable to a traditional retirement as we understand it.
What George actually said, and Dave was like, "Oh, okay, cool," and moved
Okay.
on with this day. But no,
It
there was
went,
no. We didn't.
It went
we didn't
crazy
have
on Twitter because we know this.
the
because,
financial community blew
dude,
up over this.
The day before posting our Dave
exhausting.
Ramsey video,
Yep.
this blew up on Twitter, and I was texting Jack. I'm like, dude, you see this stuff going down on Twitter? Tens of millions of views. Everyone is posting memes of like Dave Ramsey with like Lambos and this luxury lifestyle.
Oh my
like,
gosh.
withdrawing 8%.
That's
It was
hilarious.
hilarious.
Well, the financial
Just the
community
memes
for a
is like-
long time has loved to use Dave as a punching bag for clicks and views.
If you disagree with Dave and you make it publicly known and you have good grounds for it, you're not using Dave as a punching bag. Using Dave as a punching bag is not the goal. And using Dave for clicks and views is not the goal. Seeking out the truth through this controversy for the good of everyone is the goal. And to dismiss criticism by saying that you're looking for clicks and views is disingenuous and avoiding addressing the concern of the argument.
In the same clip, Dave has helped millions of people, and these people are in their mom's basement with their, they just became financial advisors and they have an opinion, and they've helped almost nobody. And so I get why they're railing against it, and their job is to, be financial advisors and do whatever the financial community does.
If the financial community and financial advisors are telling you that the advice that you're putting out on the radio, on the regular, is so risky and unrealistic that it is doing more harm than good, then you can't dismiss it as financial advisors are going to be financial advisors. And I think it might be a little condescending to say that financial advisors who may or may not have a lot of experience haven't helped anyone yet in comparison to Dave. If someone is young and they are motivated to help people, I think that should be praised instead of chastised. And I think we're going to leave it there. But I want to try to leave on a hopeful note, though. George has very clearly been exposed to sequence of returns risk arguments. He's seen the stuff that blew up on Twitter. He may not think very much of me anymore. He, didn't know I existed before this call for sure, but I'm afraid that my name, if it's known, is a swear word now at Ramsey Solutions, and, that's fine. But to publicly say that my intentions are malicious, I think is inappropriate. And I hope that maybe we can reconcile this and move forward with a sense of forgiveness. I commented on this video and asked for as much. I'm not going to lie, my feelings were a little hurt to see that because I looked up to Dave and George, and I like George. And I don't want to be made out to be the villain here because I tried to do what I thought was right. I ran a little bit of a poll on the community page on YouTube, and I'll have Amanda put the results here so that you can see them if you have the video. And if you haven't gone to our YouTube channel, you might be able to find the poll on the community page. But I basically asked, what to you are the results of George's response here? And there were some good comments, some good feedback that I saw before recording this. One of which was to recognize that George wants to keep his job, and he's playing a very careful political line where he's not going to in turn throw Dave under the bus publicly, and I respect that, I do. But I also think that he recognizes the reality of the situation when it comes to safe withdrawal rates and the truthfulness and the reality of the math that goes into those studies. So there's potential between George and Rachel that Ramsey Solutions modifies and updates its safe withdrawal rate advice or recommendation that's given on the radio. And I think that is good. But given the way that George is responding here, tells me that Dave is very rigid and not going to change his mind before he retires. So making a change before he says goodbye to Ramsey Solutions and doing the Ramsey show is probably a lost cause. I don't plan on doing anything more to try to change Dave's mind specifically. I think it's important to still reach you, those of you who are out there who might otherwise not know about the back check studies like the Trinity study and Monte Carlo simulations that can give you some statistical understanding of what your nest egg might do with your retirement plan so that we can be frugal and minimize our exposure to undue risk. I don't want us to demonize financial advisors who are simply doing their job, and I don't want us to demonize Dave for being on the wrong side of the colored dress and having some experience that has led him to fully and thoroughly denying anything more conservative than 8%. I'm going to continue making content that focuses on retirement and how we can best understand our retirement plan because I think it's so valuable. I think it's important, and I think it's something that you, if you're listening, are interested in. And I'm going to sprinkle those in throughout the year. But 2024 is going to be a year where I focus on the holistic plan for our personal finances. I'm going to try to focus on what I call the HopeFilled financial footsteps. You know, I've been a Dave Ramsey follower. I believed in the baby steps to a T. I've had some experiences that have led me to realize that there's some changes that could be made to update them in order to make the best plan for all of you. And I called the 8 steps in my plan the HopeFilled financial footsteps. I want you to think of them as the baby steps all grown up. I'm very excited to share those with you next week. So until then, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your HopeFilled financial future.